Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the podcast. This week we are going to be delving into the wonderful world of wax carving. Wax carving is a process that has been used for jewelry making for many, many years and is used to make many, many types of jewelry, but often it's used that you carve it in wax. It's cast into silver or gold or another metal, cleaned up, and you have your finished piece of jewelry. So it's a really accessible way to get started or to develop your jewelry making hobby or business. So I'm joined today by the wonderful Elin Horgan, and Elin has just refilmed some courses with us on wax carving. So we have some brand new courses. Well, they're kind of brand new, but they're new versions of courses that we had in the past. So they are the level 1 wax carving workshop, which covers teaching a wax carved ring and also wax carved pendants. That's a really good place to start your wax carving journey. And also the level 2, which is a stone setting and wax course, which covers a couple of different types of stone setting, which we'll get into talking about in the podcast. And both of those are coming out at the moment. So level 1 is coming out now, level 2 is coming out in a couple of weeks' time. And very excitingly, we have a kind of special offer on them because they're just coming out. For the first 2 weeks, they'll be 50% off the course price. So if you've been thinking about joining a wax carving course, this is going to be the perfect time to do that. And anybody who's ordered these courses in the past, so you may be listening and think, oh, I've already got those courses. Don't worry, you will be updated with the new version. So you will automatically get in your course area the new version. So it's a great time to go back and have a look at them and do some more making together. But welcome, Elin. Thank you so much for coming on and having a chat about wax carving with us today.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. So before we get started, tell us just a little bit about you and your business and, and wax and why you enjoy working in wax.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Elin. I'm a jewellery designer and maker based in Bristol. And I make my own collections that I sell online and in shops and galleries. And I also do a little bit of teaching, specifically wax carving, but I use wax carving in my work as well. So it's a technique I really enjoy. Find it very sort of meditative to get into the flow of wax carving. And I always love teaching it because I think people are really amazed by what they can make.
Yeah, absolutely. It is addictive, isn't it? Like most jewelry making, you kind of get into the flow and you can lose hours doing wax. So maybe just to get started, for anyone who's brand new and has never sort of heard of wax jewelry before, can you tell us a bit about what it is and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. So basically, you use jeweler's wax, which comes in lots of different forms. So you can get hard wax, you can get a much softer, more malleable wax. There's lots of different versions of it available. The ones that we use in the course and kind of where most people start is with blue jeweler's wax, and that comes either in sheets or in tubes. The tubes you can buy with a pre-cut hole in the middle, so you just slice them up and you've got your ring shape that you can work from. And then the sheets are probably better for doing things like pendants, where you need something a little bit flatter potentially. So basically what you do is you use some really simple tools to carve into the wax. So it's a little bit different from normal silversmithing because you're taking material away rather than building it up. And that can take a little bit of time to get your head around. I think some people find that easier to understand than others. So it's definitely something, once you get into it, you can really get into the flow, but it can take a little bit of time just to understand exactly what you need to do. But yeah, you carve into it, and what you're left with is a wax master. And that can either be cast, you can cast it yourself, or what I tend to do is to send it away to a casting house and they will then cast it in the metal of your choice. As you said, that could be silver, gold, brass, whatever you choose.
Absolutely. And then the piece comes back, doesn't it? Usually a couple of weeks later, maybe after we've sent it off. And there's a sprue attached, which is kind of like an extra bit of metal where it was attached for casting. And then we do the cleanup process, don't we? Maybe you can share a little bit about that stage of the process.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so what happens is when the pieces reach the casting house, they'll attach them to what's called a tree, which is eh, kind of as it sounds, really. It's little wax branches, if you like, that have the wax pieces at the end of them. And that's where the metal will flow into the mold. So what happens is they put that in a flask and pour in investment, melt the wax out. So you've got the negative space left, and then that's what's filled with the molten metal. And then obviously once that's cooled, they break the plaster and you have your finished wax piece. So everything is a complete one-off if you're just making it in wax, because obviously once the wax is melted, then it's gone. But what happens is when they then cut the pieces off and send them back to you, as you say, you're left often with a little sprue, which is like a little nub of metal where it's been attached. So you need to spend a little bit of time on that, obviously tidying up your castings. I usually cut the sprue off with a saw. I just find that easier. Sometimes people like to grind them down. It kind of depends how big the sprue is and where it is on the piece as well. And then yeah, you just polish and finish as normal, really, just like you would with a normal piece of silver jewellery.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really fun process and it's lovely to get the pieces back, I think. And, most people do send their pieces off to be cast. It's quite a tricky process and a very tool intensive process to cast at home. Although there is definitely a big popularity at the moment with sand casting, which is another thing that you could use wax for, is to do your own kind of sand casting at home, or it's kind of more rough casting. It's more of a rough look, isn't it?
Yeah, you get some really lovely textures with the sand casting. But yeah, if you want to go, I suppose, for more of a kind of smooth, more sort of perfect finish, I guess, then absolutely no reason not to use a casting house. I think I always think of it as it's one of those things where it can save you a bit of time and probably quite a lot of hassle if you've got lots of pieces to send off. So that's why I tend to outsource that.
Absolutely. Great. So let's have a look at some of the courses, or talk about the two ones that we refilmed, because we filmed these, gosh, maybe 10 years ago now. So we do like to refilm our courses probably every 8 years or so. Not that the technique necessarily changes, but just for the video footage and the content, things move on. And obviously Ellen is an amazing teacher and a lovely person to learn from. So maybe if we start with the level one and just talk a bit about what's covered in there. I know that you begin by showing kind of samples and showing the tools that people would need. Maybe we can start with talking about the tools, because it's a very simple toolkit, isn't it, to get started with wax?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the joys of it, that you really don't need lots of, or really any expensive tools. So yeah, typically I would use a double-ended wax file. So that's a really coarse file, and that's great for removing lots of wax with. So quite often, if I'm making a piece, probably most of the work would be done by using the file. If you've got a frame saw, that's great. And using it, you can buy specific wax blades to use with your saw. So they're spiral rather than with teeth, and it means that the wax doesn't clog them up. What I tend to find is if I'm cutting something a little bit more precise, I actually just use a slightly coarser normal saw blade, and obviously keep that separate from your other blades so that it doesn't you don't end up using it for the metal. But that can give you a little bit of a more defined line, I think, whereas the wax saw blades can be quite jaggedy and messy when you cut with them. And then yeah, I suppose on top of that, then it's just things that you would use to refine the piece and add texture. So a craft knife is great, just a bog standard craft knife that you can buy from an art shop. That can be really good for drawing across the surface of the wax to smooth it out. And smaller needle files are good as well. Again, not something you'd want to use on your metal. So even if you've got a couple which maybe slightly past their best, you can put them aside and keep them for wax. And things like dentist tools can be brilliant for, again, just shaping and carving the wax. You can heat them up in the flame of a candle or a lighter, and that allows you to push into the wax and make lots of lots of interesting textures with. You can also get a wax pen, and that can be really useful. It's really just a battery operated heated element. So you keep your finger on the button, that heats the element, and you can use that to melt wax. Really good for making granules and things like that with. So yeah, you don't need very much to get started. I think one of the fun things is about it that you can sort of just experiment with using different tools to see what effects they create.
Yeah, yeah, you can be very playful with it, can't you? Because it's not expensive to wax. So if you make something you don't like it, it's fine. You don't have to get it cast. So I always found that quite nice about it, is that it felt like there wasn't too much pressure, and it was just a place where you can play and explore and see what comes. And you spoke earlier about the kind of mindset, I suppose, that's different to silversmithing, where you're sort of taking stuff away. It's more sculptural, so you almost envisage what you're going to be making and it's kind of coming to life, whereas usually we're building up and, oh, we've made a ring shank and now we need to attach a setting and now we need to add the next bit, but instead it's taking away. So it's quite yeah, it's quite a fun thing to get your head around, is to see, well, what happens if I do this, and what does this tool do to the wax, and then imagining it in the metal, what it would look like, what it would feel like, how heavy it's going to be, because it's always so much heavier than in the wax. You're like, oh wow, that's, yeah, it's a weighty piece. And making sure, I find that I don't know about your students, Ellen, but I find the like common mistakes is either taking too much away, so it's too thin that you can't, it's not, you know, it's going to break, or it's, you know, it's not, it doesn't have enough area for what you were trying to do, or leaving too much that actually feels really light and soft, but when you get it back it's this huge chunky ring, which is fine if that's what you wanted. But I think some of my first pieces, I was quite surprised at how heavy they were compared to the wax, but it's all part of the fun of learning.
Yeah, definitely. I think it can be quite deceptive. So when it's cast in silver, it's just over 10 times heavier than the wax. So it can be worth just weighing your pieces before you send them off, just so you get an idea of how much that's going to be in the silver. And you're right, because the wax is so light, often with a ring or something, it might feel quite comfortable. And then when you get it back, you realise quite how chunky it is. So I think there's a lot to be said for really taking your time. As you say, it's great to play and experiment with different things. And I think if it's a piece that you want to get cast, really spend some time refining it. And of course, you know, it's worth bearing in mind if you're doing it commercially, so you're looking at making pieces to sell, then it's obviously better to have slightly lighter pieces as much as possible, as long as that fits with the design, because it's going to cost you less to cast them as well, because you'll be using less metal. So there's lots of different ways you can, you know, you can maybe use a burr, for example, to take off a little bit of the inside of a ring, if that helps lighten it. Or it might even just be making a piece slightly flatter. So if it's a pendant, then just making sure that it's not too chunky.
Yes, yeah, especially with the prices of silver and gold, it's like keep it, you know, lean. Brilliant. Okay, so we start kind of going through the tools, which obviously Ellen does in more detail in the program. And then Ellen starts by teaching a ring, which is always a really nice place to start. And she talks about kind of different styles. You can create really nice geometric kind of designs with wax. You can also create really beautiful organic kind of styles, and also you cover in the course looking at granulation and how to add little balls, and playing around with texture and things. So we start with the ring, obviously looking at sizing and all those kind of things, because there's some adjustments, aren't there, Ellen, in terms of sizing with rings and wax to think about too.
Yeah, that's right. So the wax tube just comes with one standard size hole in the middle of it. So often when I'm teaching in real life, students panic because they try on a piece and they can't get it on their finger.
Yeah,
So that's always step one, is to size the slice of wax you have. So there's a special bladed ring stick you can use, which just scrapes off the inside of the ring really gently. And you basically just pop that on and kind of give it a couple of twists. And I tend to flip it over just to make sure that you're not getting a tapered shape on the inside. But then once it's comfortable, once it comfortably fits your finger, then yeah, basically you're ready to start carving from the outside in.
Yeah, absolutely. So making sure it's going to be, yeah, like you said, comfortable and fit after all the cleanup and everything. And then after the ring, you go on to show students how to make a pendant. And this project focuses quite a lot on layers. You make like a mountain kind of landscape where there's different layers of the mountains, really beautiful, and show lots of different examples of, again, like organic leaves and geometric kind of art deco things. So I think one of the things I really like about it is how no matter what style people are interested in, you can use wax to create that style. And it's so versatile in that way. But yeah, the pendant project, I think, is a really nice one to get people thinking about, what do they want to make? And it's different, isn't it, to traditional silver work, where you often start with a sheet of metal. And I suppose it lends itself more to 3D design, something a little bit, yeah, with more of that element in it. So yeah, that's a really nice project as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the joy of wax. You can create these pieces with a bit more volume that you would, not that you maybe can't make in silver. Some of them you could make, but it's much easier to do that in wax. And the good thing about the wax is it's so much easier to remove than it is if you're filing away in silver. So actually, if you want different layers or something like that, it's perfect. But you're right, it's incredibly versatile. So whether it's really sharp angles, something very geometric, that can work beautifully, but it's also really good for sort of flowing shapes, and yeah, endless ways to add texture or to carve into it. So it's a really great material to use.
Absolutely. And I think what's nice is like anyone can try it. So even if you're not particularly dexterous in your fingers or your hands, because it's wax, it's soft, it's something that is, yeah, it's quite light on the body, I suppose. And I think that can be a nice break, even for silversmiths and people who work in silver and gold a lot. It's quite nice to combine with wax, so that you've got a day where it's like, oh, it's a wax day today, as opposed to everything being quite tough on the hands. So I'm sure you can make it tough on the hands. I'm sure there's times when I've filed bits of my finger off in wax,
Definitely.
but different challenges. So yeah, so that's the level 1 course. So anyone who's new to wax, or maybe you've done a little bit, like we have a few free wax courses, it's a bit more in depth and kind of just really covers what you'd probably learn in like a 1-day wax carving session. So we used to run these at London Jewellery School, and this is kind of the content that we covered, but some really nice projects that Ellen's made for us to get you inspired. And yeah, something that anybody, even if you're a total beginner, can get started with. And then we have the level 2, which is really exciting, because level 2 is stone setting in wax. And there's loads of different ways to set stones in wax, but we kind of cover the basics. So 2 really lovely settings. One is to set a faceted stone, or a pointed bottom stone, as I sometimes call it. So that's kind of creating a setting which you'd probably flush set after. There's lots of different ways you could set it after. And then one for a cabochon setting. So a cabochon stone is a stone with a flat bottom and a curved top. So you could do that in plain or rose cut or whatever you like. But maybe you could talk a bit, Ellen, about yeah, stone setting in wax and cast in place versus the type of settings we're talking about, which are, yeah, tell us a bit about how the stones and wax interact.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, you're right. There's kind of different ways of approaching stones in wax. So the technique that we focus on is making a setting for the stone. We're not sending the stone in with the wax to be cast. That the setting is then done separately afterwards, after it's been cast and cleaned up. So it can be great. It's really nice if you're doing a flush set faceted stone. Then making the seat in wax beforehand is so easy. It's literally a sort of 5-minute job, because you're drilling into the wax, so you're using your setting burr to go down into the wax, and because the wax is so soft, it's really easy to create a seat. Compared to doing it in metal, which can take a really long time to get it just right. So yeah, it's great for faceted stones. And again, if you're doing a cabochon and you want a nice bezel setting, if it's on a larger wax piece, for example, it might be tricky to solder bezel strip on to a big piece like that, because you run the risk of melting it. So actually creating the setting you know, that's a sort of integral setting that's very much part of the piece, can be a really nice way of doing it. So the other way of using stones in wax can be, as you said, cast in place. So that's where you're using stones and you're actually embedding them in the wax, and then the whole piece is then cast. The tricky thing about that is that not many stones can survive the heat. So typically diamonds, rubies, and sapphires are what people use, but you can never guarantee what's going to happen with them. So you can end up with discolored stones and cracked stones and goodness knows what going on. So yeah, it's a great technique, but it's probably a little bit more advanced than what we're talking about in this course.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the level 3. We cover that in the level 3 course, which is inside the diploma in fine jewelry. But yes, so what's really nice about the level 2 that we were talking about is you learn these 2 different settings. And I think once you learn how to do those settings, they're so versatile. There's so much you can do with them. So Elin covers how to do like a basic ring with the flush setting as the central piece, and also how to create a piece around it, because it's kind of integral to the design, and then how to do a bezel setting on its own, which you could apply to pendants, earrings, you know, necklaces, bracelets, whatever you like, cufflinks, and I think once you get the idea of how to create the settings and how to create pieces with the settings, there's so many design possibilities to kind of, so it's quite an exciting technique to explore.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think with the bezel, you know, I suppose when you think of a bezel setting, typically you're thinking of just a kind of, you know, quite a plain, plain setting potentially, but actually, you know, again, the possibilities for adding texture or making a really thick bezel that maybe you set with a hammer and a punch or something. Yeah, there's a huge range of possibilities. So it's a really nice one to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so they are the 2 courses. And like I said, the level 1 is out now and it's on 50% discount. And it only for a couple of weeks, because we want you guys to go and do it. And we'd love to see what you make, and use the Jewellers Academy Facebook group to share and ask questions and get support. And also share on Instagram what you're making, because we would absolutely love to see your pieces. Level 2 will be out very soon as well, so look out for that one, and I'll put a link to all of those in the show notes. And yeah, Elin, thank you so much for coming and sharing a bit about the wax course today. Is there any, just to leave everyone, any final bit of advice for someone getting started on their wax journey?
I think probably I just go back to what you said earlier, which is about just really approaching it with a sort of sense of fun and playfulness, because yeah, the wax itself isn't hugely expensive. You know, a tube probably is going to cost about £15 potentially, and you could probably get, you know, anything between about 6 and 10 rings out of that, depending on how big they are. So, you know, there really is an opportunity to really play around, and the best part is you only have to cast the things that you're happy with at the end of it. So yeah, I would just say take some time, maybe put aside a afternoon or something where you can really just play around with the techniques and kind of see where you get to with it. But it's a lot of fun, and it's a really nice addition, I think, to traditional silversmithing skills.
Absolutely, yeah, sit down, watch the videos, put some music on, get carving, spend the afternoon. Great way to spend the summer. I'm addicted to wax carving myself, so absolutely love it. And can't wait to see what everybody makes as well, because it's always interesting to see how different styles come out. And it's hugely popular at the moment. I think it's a really lovely way for building a jewelry business as well, because it's something that you can kind of, like Ellen said, you know, make the pieces, decide the pieces that you really like, send them off, they come back, set any stones if you need to set them, polish them up, and they're ready to go. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ellen. Thanks everyone for listening. Enjoy the courses, and we will speak to you again on another episode very soon. Bye for now.